everyone, it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm. Today I wanted to talk about succession planting lilies. This is a question that I've gotten quite a bit from other viewers, and so we're going to talk about just high-level fundamentals of succession planting lilies, but then I'm going to talk about some free resources out there, some paid resources out there, specifically the Lily Workshop. I did take the Lily Workshop, so I will give a brief review of my thoughts about the workshop, and then we're going to talk about some high-level financials when it comes to growing lilies. So if you're new to my channel, my name is Jessie. I live in New Jersey in Zone 6B. This is my second year of flower farming. Prior to this year, I had never grown a single lily. Now, I had used lilies in my mixed bouquets for the farmer's market because I had bought some lilies from a local grower, and I really loved working with them as a focal, but I just didn't know much about them other than the fact that they are a bulb. So earlier last year, I had taken the tulip workshop. I had a really good experience with the tulip workshop, and I think this was like February time frame when someone on the tulip workshop group, the Facebook group, wrote something along the lines of, I'm so glad that I'm not going to have a gap in between my tulips and my earliest field blooming spring flowers because I'm going to have lilies to carry me through that gap. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then they had some really great praise for the Lily Workshop, and that's when I decided to dive head in. So just to give everyone some relative perspective, this is where I grow. It is a 90 by 40 foot space with some very generous walkways. So we're talking about a relatively small space for growing in the grand scheme. And I would say that for most types of flower varieties, I'm growing really about like 75 to maybe 200 of a certain variety in mixed colors in a single color. This year, I grew about 2,000 lilies. So for that kind of scale, it's a lot of lilies. And my number one crop is tulips. So this year I'll be growing about, I would say 8,000 to 10,000 tulips. Last year I grew about 5,000 tulips, but that means that lilies are a close second. And I'm still debating how much I grow next year, but in year one, I already grew 2,000 lilies. So lilies form the backbone of my focals, basically from the time I had them, which was sometime in late June, all the way through now and the next few weeks. So for that reason, lilies have been really important for me. Now, this is probably also a good time to mention that if you don't follow me on Instagram, you should. Here's my Instagram handle. I talk about the day-to-days of me harvesting lilies, things around like days to maturity. That's a little bit more real-time stuff. I'll recap some of the stuff that I learned through that and post in my stories here. And then I also have a Patreon where I do talk about lilies quite in detail, especially with the marketing aspect of it to florists. And I will have an article that accompanies this post. So that is gated content where we will go into the details, especially the financials piece. But let's actually dig into the fundamentals of growing lilies. So, and when I say growing lilies, I mean forcing lilies. So lilies will naturally bloom during the late spring, early summer. We're talking about like the June-ish time frame. So there are different types of lilies out there. You've got your Asiatics, you've got your Orientals, and now you've got some breeding type of variety. So I have predominantly grown Oriental trumpets, which are OT hybrids, and I have also grown Longiflorum Asiatics or LA hybrids. The main difference between the two is that the LA hybrids are unscented and the OT hybrids are scented. But amongst or beyond the fact that we've got scented versus unscented, there's also different flowering habits. So for example, the OT hybrids are very trumpet-like. They're very big blooms. They are a lot more showy in my view, but they are also a pain in the butt to transport when they open because everything just flares out on the sides, so it's hard to use sleeves. On the other hand, the LA hybrids have more upward facing blooms, so it does make it easier to transport, but in my view they're just a little bit less showy. There's a place for both, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about just some of the challenges and successes I had with lilies. But let's talk about the fundamentals right now, because like most bulbs go through basically like the natural cycle. There is winter, then there's fall, spring, and then they go into dormancy in the summer, right? So that's like hyacinth, tulips, lilies, daffodils. With lilies specifically, the distributor, so the place where you buy your bulbs from, is typically going to fake your winter for you. And that basically means that they freeze the bulbs and then they thaw the bulbs before they ship to you. So when you get them, you can plant them. And this is why it is not advised for you to refreeze or refrigerate the bulbs. The general advice I've been given is you can do it for like up to 2 weeks. I know some people who do it successfully for like a month, but really what you're trying to do is, if you're succession planting, you are going to be ordering from your supplier on a constant basis because they're doing that work for you for faking winter. So your job is then to provide it fall and then spring weather. Now, when we say providing it fall types of weather, we're saying we want the bulbs to be rooting in cooler temperatures. The cooler temperatures help the bulbs put on good and robust root growth. Without that robust root growth, what's going to happen is you are going to not get sufficient roots for that bulb to really get all of the water that it needs in order to grow that optimal bloom. And I had a couple of successions in the dead of the summer, like mid-July, where it was really, really hot. And when I say really hot, I mean it's hot during the day and it's also hot in the evenings or nighttime. And the nighttime is actually really important because if it stays hot throughout the entire day, you are obviously not going to fake fall. And this is basically what they look like right now. So I'm going to show you in the field. The lilies in this raised bed over here were planted during the hottest time of summer. And I would say that I didn't do a great job necessarily covering the bulbs completely enough to insulate them from the heat. And let's check out what happened. So you've actually got a full variety here. So we're talking about close to somewhere from like 25 to 30 bulbs that just aborted. So you can see that there is a robust stem growth or leaf growth here, but no buds, right? So this is like pre-bud abortion, because sometimes you start seeing a smaller bud that just gets aborted. Oftentimes this is a indication of stress, and if I had to surmise, this is stress from just like too much heat, not enough good root growth. In fact, if I were to pull one of these up, you would see that there's like very minimal root growth. The other impact is you might get buds, but you will get very short stems. So this is a pretty short stemmed lily. You can see I didn't even cut these. I just wanted to perennialize this. And if I really wanted to do it correctly, I would have cut the heads off, but I never got around to it. So the bulb will still regenerate because there's enough leaves on here to do that. So typically, I'm trying to see if I can find any other ones. See, like there's a lot more bud abortion here. So I find that it is also dependent on variety. Some varieties here I got lilies out of and they did perfectly well, and others there was abortion. I found that some of my doubles over here took a lot longer to grow, and they grew fine, but not as great as the ones that I had grown earlier in the year. So the lack of the ability to fake fall is quite impactful on getting quality blooms. So assuming that you are able to fake fall, then we get into faking spring or growing conditions. And I feel like this is where there's a bit more wiggle room, because even though lilies want to be grown in those temperatures that are natural to June, in July and August when I was growing them, they were fine under the 90-degree days. The result was still these shorter stem lengths, but for the purposes of which I was using lilies, it was fine. I didn't need like 3 feet tall lilies anyway. So for the most part, I found the most amount of challenge in faking fall for rooting. And I think going forward, I would probably hold off on planting during the month of July for that reason. And honestly, when you plant during the month of July, the days to maturity is, even though the days are getting shorter, it is still there's still enough light intensity, and the weather is so warm that generally you're still going to get accelerated blooms. And so those blooms came at a time where I was competing with Lysianthus, with dahlias. So for my florist customers, lilies were less of a special offering, even though on the retail side, it did make it quite easy for me to make bouquets with lilies at that time. So That's it for the fundamentals. Really high level. Conceptually, it is not a hard concept. So even though it is bright and sunny outside right now, it is October 19th today. We are projected to get very close to frost next week at, I think it's going to be like 34 degrees at night. So I'm not going to take any risks. And we have built some pallets, or I guess Eric was able to get some free pallets. He reinforced the pallets with some OSB, and we're going to put the crates of lilies onto these pallets and bring them into our pole barn structure for that night, because then the few days after, we're going to climb back up into the 40s and 50s at night. In fact, it's going to be gorgeous weather. So I just need to get these blooms through for, I would say, another 3 weeks before they are ready, and then I am done with the lily season. Now, what's cool about succession planting lilies is that you can hypothetically have lilies year round. The bigger challenge is transporting those blooms once you have cut them and put them into bouquets, because lilies are quite fragile against the cold weather. So if it's below freezing, they will bruise, and you just don't want to be selling lilies and getting them into customers' hands during that time of year. So for that reason, that's why a lot of people stop forcing lilies sometime in the late fall, and then they'll pick it up again in the early spring. So my next session will be for Mother's Day, and believe it or not, we start planting in mid to late January using Southern Hemisphere bulbs for that. Now, one thing that is important to note is that if you are in a region where you have seen the scarlet lily beetle, it's a really big consideration in my mind as to whether or not you choose to grow lilies. So this year, luckily, I did see some scarlet lily beetles, but I didn't see a ton. I saw probably, if I had to count, about a dozen, so it felt quite manageable. Now, they will overwinter in your soil. They are absolutely disgusting. I don't use any chemicals where we are. I don't do any kind of spraying, so it's all manual efforts in terms of getting rid of them. So scarlet lily beetle is unfortunately, and it's predominantly in the Northeast. So I am in the Northeast, but like Massachusetts, upstate New York, Vermont area, they all have a high presence of red scarlet lily beetle. So just be careful if you live in those areas. They also like things like Fritilia. So I would be mindful myself not to grow those so that they have a food source before lilies come on. So I'm going to continue monitoring it. But luckily this year I had few enough of them to concern me for next year. So that brings me to my experience with lilies as a whole this year. And if you've been following me either on YouTube or on Instagram, you'll know that I became a fan of lilies this year. I would say that I had a really great experience with them with retail, and a more challenging experience for my florist designer customers. So for retail, even when I grew the OT hybrids, which were like highly fragrant, I would say that they still did pretty well, because half the population really enjoys that scent. A portion of the population doesn't, like, they smell it, they don't mind it. And then you definitely have a decent amount of people who not only don't like it, but they also get migraines. So that is something to consider. I would say that with the LA hybrids, I've definitely seen a lot more momentum in terms of people being open to them and just being like, oh, I didn't realize that lilies come unscented. And there is still enough of color and variety for that to be really attractive to people who may not like lilies and then discover, oh, I love the coloring on this lily, and I can't believe that that's a lily because I've never seen it. So retail wise, I did really well with lilies, and I would say that there are not a lot of growers, especially small scale growers, who force lilies, even though it's not a tough concept to implement. So oftentimes I would be the only one with lilies in this area, especially at a farmer's market or even at this country store that I'm selling at. I'm the only one selling flowers, but predominantly my bouquets are made out of lilies and dahlias. So for that reason, you can stand out and have a consistent focal if you are forcing lilies for retail, such as for like a farmer's market. There are times of year where certain focals just stop, right? So if you think about after tulip season, there's a gap, and then you get ranunculus, and then there's a bit of a gap before all of your later spring stuff comes in, and then obviously then you are waiting for your summer focals to come in, and then there's still a couple of weeks sometimes zones where there's a gap. So if you really hone in on lily succession planting, you can make sure that you have a reliable focal throughout the entire year. And that is really, really valuable. And I found that even at the height of summer where I was getting my lisianthus, my dahlias coming in, even having lilies to complement some of those bouquets, sometimes those were the most profitable bouquets because I could just put in like 3 stems of a focal, a couple of filler, and call it a day. And they were easy to make, easy to grow, and everyone loved them. So I actually have a bouquet, I have a video on making $10 profitable bouquets that I'll link up here, and you can check that out if you're interested. So now let's talk about my experience working with florists and lilies. Now, I think that when I took the Lily workshop, I was under the impression that one of the instructors did a lot of event work, and so she incorporated lilies in a lot of her design work. She also wholesale ships lilies to other florists. So I think I came in with this assumption that, a lot of designers and florists are already on the lily train. And my personal experience is that at least where I sell at the co-op that I sell at to florists and designers, that is not the case. So there is a bit of a lack of awareness as to, one, sometimes even the multitude of lilies that now exist, and two, how rugged they are, especially in event work. The greatest thing about lilies is that they can actually be out of water for a significant period of time and still hold really, really well. The downside of lilies is that once they bloom, their petals are very fragile and it is easy to bruise or to basically damage them in transport, right? So you've got to balance that. But the good news is that for most lily stems, there are multiple buds. So even if you accidentally knock off a bud or you bruise one, you've got other buds to rely on. And I found that I had to do a lot of marketing with the florists at my co-op to get them to either attempt to accept or try out those lilies. And then I would also say that over time, I feel like that as I post more and more people designing with lilies and stuff, I did see an increase in sales. So overall, I would say that at the co-op, I sold about $600 worth of lilies. I am a very, very small grower at my co-op relative to everyone else. So that is not a high number at all. It is actually my highest grossing flower that I sold just because I grew so many lilies. And by the time I was selling tulips at the co-op, most of my forced tulips were already done. So my second highest plant or flower variety that I sold at the co-op was yarrow. So you also know how important yarrow has been for me this year. But lilies trumped that by a slight bit. Sold about $600 worth because of the volume that I was just growing. All right, so now that we've talked about my experiences, hopefully I've given you something to noodle on in terms of potentially why you should be growing lilies. Let's talk about some free resources. There are plenty of free resources out there. On YouTube, North Lawn, so Danielle from North Lawn Flower Farms, loves lilies. She has a playlist of lilies that you should check out. She doesn't force lilies, but she does grow them in her growing space or in her landscaping, and she uses them for bouquets. And she says that she always sells out a lily. So I would check out her videos because she's always really great about just giving 101 on how to grow, how to harvest, and all that stuff. If you want some more detailed information on succession planting lilies, the Gardener's Workshop with Lisa Mason Ziegler just did an interview with Dave Dowling on succession planting lilies, and they go into quite a bit of detail. I would say that they are giving you basically like 85% of the knowledge that you need to know in order to force lilies. So they talk about why you should be succession planting, introduction to crate growing, how to get crates, the types of lilies to grow, when and where to buy them, how to plant them, how to care for growing plants, and then how and when to harvest. So a really, really good podcast. Even I learned some stuff from it, even though I've been doing this and I took the Lily workshop. Definitely recommend checking that out. Another really good resource is Onings. So Onings sells tulip bulbs, and they actually have a lily growing guide that they send out to people. I will also link it in the description below. It's this PDF that's 14 pages, also quite comprehensive. And it talks about things like the types of lilies, including the newer hybrids that exist, greenhouse setup, outdoor cultivation, harvest and post-harvest treatment. They go into detail about diseases and pests, and then a summary page on growing. So 14 pages, a lot of good information there. your reps from whoever sells lilies have incentive to keep you educated and to really help you with succession planting lilies. Succession planting lilies is definitely not a new concept. It is practiced all around the world. There's a lot of knowledge already on it, and these suppliers or distributors have motivation for you to be able to do it because then they can sell you more bulbs. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone or email and ask them, hey, could you give me a little bit more information? I live here, here's my temperatures, blah, blah, blah. Like, what varieties would you recommend that I grow? Like, do you have any mixed crates? All that, like, pick their brains on growing and what you could be growing, especially if they offer mixed varieties. Last but not least, now let's talk about the Lily Workshop. So I took the Lily Workshop earlier in the year after seeing that Facebook post that I talked about where someone really just loved having the ability to bridge the gap between tulips and their early spring crop. And I took this workshop when I was 39 weeks pregnant, sitting on the comfort of my couch, and I was able to go through the videos within basically one day. The course book was shipped pretty much immediately, and then I got access to the private Facebook group. So the course ended up costing me $550. So there was a $50 coupon because I'm a Tulip Workshop alum. So for everyone else, it would be $600, and it's what they call rolling admission, meaning there's no specified date that they start the course. It's just whenever you want to start it, you can start it, and then you obviously have lifetime access to the videos and the information. The videos are obviously very well produced. They hire a professional production company to film them. So everything is very, very well curated and just well put together. Now, I will say that this is the type of course where it is hard for someone where there's like so much information out there on how to do this. Like, why would you pay $600 for a course? And so I would say that it's not like the Tulip Workshop where I feel like tulips are a much more advanced form of forcing. There's a lot more details, nitty-gritty things that you do need to understand, and there's a huge opportunity cost because it would take so much time and money for you to learn how to do it on your own, versus with the lilies, I feel like there's a little bit more wiggle room for you to experiment and still succeed. But that being said, I want to talk about why the Lily Workshop could be appropriate for people in certain kinds of situations. So the first is that you are the type of person who prefers a bit of extra guidance. So even though the information might be out there, it's readily accessible and you can read it, you just want a little bit more of guidance and someone to talk to. And that's what that Facebook group is for. So it is not 24/7 service. I just want to make sure people are aware, but if you have a question, you put in the Facebook group and the instructors as well as other people who grow might respond. So I will say that compared to the Tulip Workshop, the Lily Workshop has significantly fewer people. So therefore there's fewer posts and also fewer responses as a result. Part of what makes a Facebook group so valuable is the amount of people in there, and that is correlated with the amount of information that is shared. So as more people join the Lily Workshop and get involved, then that Facebook group will also get better. But the instructors do try to make sure that they stay on top in the group and answer any questions that people might have. So for example, I actually had a question about, I have this one lily that just looks deformed and I don't think it was a growing thing. Like, what do you think it is? And Emily responded, she thinks that might have been something from the supplier side in terms of growing bulbs back in Europe, right? So it's just one of those things where, like, I probably wouldn't have found the answer unless if I reached out to my supplier, and it was a lot easier to just post it in the Facebook group. I also find that I learn about a lot of things that I don't personally experience, but might be helpful for me later on. And that's not just for the Lily Workshop Facebook group, that's for all Facebook groups. The second scenario is like me. This was me fitting into this category. You want to go big. So meaning you want to really take that risk, dive in, and maximize your chance of success. I've talked about how growing 2,000 lilies is a lot for me. That's a lot of financial responsibility to assume. So to give you context, the 2,000 lilies that I bought cost about $1,100, of which $300 in that amount was for shipping. But my all-in cost just for the bulbs alone was $1,100. I don't think I would have spent $1,100 without taking a course, even with all of the resources out there. And I knew that I wanted to have a consistent focal. I knew I wanted to learn how to specialize in growing a crop that I could rely on for most of the year, and therefore this made it a valid investment for me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about finances later in terms of how, like, did I break even? Did I make money off of this? So you'll get an idea of how much you should be thinking about doing if you want to invest something like $600 in a workshop. The third one is just you are someone who likes a course. You want a course book. I mean, who doesn't love receiving a course book in the mail, getting excited, getting access to videos? A lot of people who take the Floret course, I mean, the Floret course is what, like $2,000? Part of the excitement is all of the materials that you receive, right? So there are certain people who are just like great students, and it's not enough for them to try to piecemeal all of the information out there. They may not even have time to piecemeal all the information out there. So if you fit into any of these three categories, I think $600 is actually very reasonable as an investment to spend in this kind of information. So this course is not for you if you don't plan on growing lilies at a relatively higher scale. You know, if you're only planning on planting like a couple hundred here or there, I would say skip the course and start with regular lilies, perennializing them, and then dipping your toes into forcing. I am personally glad, as I said, that I took this course. I find that courses as a whole give you a really solid foundation for basically taking your learning to the next level. You're not going to learn everything in this workshop or course, but what you will learn is really like 80% of what you need to do to start succeeding, and then you're going to learn a lot more along the way. So for example, I am still learning days to maturity and the impact on days to maturity based off of how many light hours we get from the sun, the temperature. So I think a really good example is I was trying to get Thanksgiving lilies. I got lilies during week, I think it was 31, and then week 33. 2 weeks difference in terms of those successions, and the week 31 succession bloomed about like 3-4 weeks ago. The week 33 succession, still the ones in the field. So even like a 2-week difference because of the swings in the temperature have had such a profound impact on bloom time. And that is something that you have to experience for yourself and learn. Finally, let's talk about numbers. And I will do a more detailed video on profitability of lilies. But for right now, high level, I said I sold about $600 to florists. And then I do actually keep, for every single bouquet that I sold this season, I figured out how much of that bouquet was worth for lilies. So I know that I sold about $1,400 worth of lilies to retail customers. So if you put those two together, I sold about $2,000 in gross revenue for lilies alone. Now, the workshop was $600, and then I also said that I spent about $1,100 for the bulbs, including the price of shipping. So net, I definitely made a profit, right? Because $1,100 plus $600 is $1,700, and I've made $2,000 right now. I still have about, I would say, 300 lilies out in the field that I still have yet to recognize revenue on. And then even though I'm treating these lilies as an annual, I will be perennializing some of them, so then I'll be able to recognize additional revenue. And that's why I can't do a video on my true profitability yet until I at least have the ones that have that are going to bloom in a few weeks. But overall, I've clearly made back the money, assuming you don't count labor right now. And so what I want to demonstrate here is that it was not difficult for me to make back that workshop money as well as the cost of the bulbs. We're talking about 6 sessions here that I started between April through August. They were all grown in crates or in raised beds. And I think that just the ability for me to use crates, even in the field, was quite good because it allowed me to move the crates, to, like, for example, right now the sun sets in a certain spot, which means that certain parts of the field are getting more day length versus other parts. So I'm able to maneuver the crates around during different times of the season to try to maximize their time in the light. All right, so that was a lot of information in video. I hope that was helpful for you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I'll definitely be doing other videos on lilies just because they're such an important crop for me this year. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video.